It's my pleasure to start with the education priority issues. And of course, we're very happy to know that the Biden-Harris administration has already agreed to fix some of the drastic proposals and activities that they did with messing up Title IX and sexual harassment. The Biden administration has agreed as one of its first acts to do what it can to counteract the 2020 Title IX regulations. But Ben Strand, who's a legislative assistant in charge of education issues at Senator Mazie Hirono from Hawaii's office, who has been the original Senate sponsor of the Gender Equity Education Act, will talk about the Gender Equity Education Act and how it's a major infrastructure proposal to help the Department of Education establish an Office of Gender Equity and provide funds for Title IX coordinators and training at all levels. And I am pleased to ask Ben to take it away. He will explain that the act is co-sponsored with the same language in the House by Representative Doris Matsui. Ben, do you want to go ahead and inform us of this important priority? Can't hear you. You're unmuted. I don't know why we can't hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. And sorry for the brief round of charades to start the call. Apologies.
I'm sorry, Ben.
But anyway, we've introduced the bill. We first introduced it in 2016 during the 114th Congress, and then subsequently during the 115th Congress. During the time, we've really worked closely with AAUW, which has been a really great partner on this legislation over the past few years. So we really appreciate their support. Just trying to think some other updates. So currently we have about 16 co-sponsors in the Senate and 9 in the House. Thinking back to when we first introduced the bill in 2016, I think we had about 10 co-sponsors.
In a nutshell.
So happy that we've been able to build support for the bill over the years. And yeah, that's kind of where the bill is currently. Really briefly, I can talk more about what the bill actually does. So the main component, as Sue alluded to, is as far as infrastructure, is that the bill would establish an Office of Gender Equity within the U.S. Department of Education, which would really be focused on providing states, school districts, colleges, and K-12 schools with additional resources so that they could better implement Title IX. Some of the responsibilities of the office. So the main, one of the key components is that it would be able to provide grants to address discrimination in education settings. So we have $70 million that would be in grant authority per year over the course of 6 years, I think is how we had it drafted for this Congress. And again, that funding would really be focused on helping states, school districts, colleges, K-12 schools, others with implementing Title IX in education. I should also mention, so the office, it would have other responsibilities. We view it as a resource to provide technical assistance and annual trainings for Title IX coordinators. So that's another key component to the bill. It would also be responsible for providing specific resources like developing a handbook to help Title IX coordinators conduct self-evaluations. Some of the other key components, so best practices for addressing discrimination and harassment on campus, counseling and career guidance, training resources, and other resources to address some of the issues that we're seeing on campuses and off campuses as well, I should say. But I think those are some of the key highlights for the bill. You know, we're really excited about reintroducing it this Congress. You know, I should say it's still early and we're not exactly sure what the reintroduction will look like. But I'm happy to discuss any questions or answer any questions you may have to the extent that I can. And again, just really thank you for the opportunity to be part of the conversation. And sorry again for the technical difficulties at the beginning there. So.
Thanks so much, Ben. And another possibility is that some of the elements of this Gender Equity in Education Act could actually be accomplished by the Biden-Harris transition. They could actually establish an Office of Gender Equity within the Department of Education. So that's something that our women's groups might want to consider suggesting to the transition team, and it would give a head start on the legislation.
I think that, yeah, no, that's a really good point too. I think, you know, one of the things I would mention is, you know, we lay out in some details, you know, some of the responsibilities for what we would want to see in such an office. So to the extent that that would be helpful in making recommendations to the administration, you know, we're happy to share, you know, some of that language or discuss that further. But I think, yeah, no, we're always looking for opportunities. I think, you know, we have a kind of a new opportunity going into the 117th Congress with a new, more friendly administration. So that's something we're certainly going to think on further over the next few months.
That's great. We'll be glad to work with you on that. Does anybody else have any comments or questions quickly for Ben? Karen?
Yeah. Ben, presume this will be a whole new bill with a new bill number in the new Congress. Have you lined up some of the same sponsors? Will you have it, when it is introduced, will it have at least as many as it has right now?
No, thanks, Darren, for the question. That's certainly our goal. You know, I think we would certainly reach out to some of our current co-sponsors, all of them really, to hopefully get them lined up before reintroduction. So, you know, we really have, we've been happy that we've been able to build support for the bill over the last few Congresses. So we would certainly try to reintroduce it. It will have a new bill number, and to the extent that we can get our previous co-sponsors on board, that'll be important for us.
Do you know yet if Congressman, I live in Congresswoman Matsui's district, and we're trying to actually make an appointment with her for AUW. So has she indicated whether she'll be on the bill again in the House? Or is that
as the House sponsor?
Yeah, she's the House sponsor.
So we've had early conversations. They sound like they're interested. So I would expect them to lead the House effort. But we're still kind of working out what that'll look like next Congress.
If we can make an appointment with her, we will encourage her. Yeah.
I have a question, Ben. The Jeanette Lim from CWI. Is there any consideration for including CLEAR Act or Violence Against Women Act benefits to this office?
That's a really good question, Jeanette. It's not something we've included in previous iterations. In the bill, you know, we haven't made too many substantial changes. It's something, frankly, I think we would just have to think on further before we made any changes. But if there were, you know, specific changes that you folks were interested in, you know, we'd be happy to look at that. I think we'd probably have to think on it further, though. So
that's a great offer. I'm glad you're still open to those ideas. I think it's a great way to fund some of this training, but these other statutes probably could use it too. So thank you.
Sure.
And hi, this is Diana Bailey. I work with a number of nonprofit organizations, but one has to do with career and workforce development. And I know that we've been working with Thompson and Langervan for the I forget the whole name, but it's basically Career and Workforce Development Education Act. We were trying to get some gender equity language in there as well. Do you know, or have you connected in any way with that? Or, because there's some obvious issues in terms of pay equity for the career choices that particularly women make, and women of color. So is there a possible overlap with some of these efforts to make for gender equity as a whole, is what I'm trying to get at?
Sure. No, that's another great question. I think, we haven't worked specifically with the Thompson office. You mentioned that they have separate legislation that they've introduced. Is that?
Yeah, both of them. Yeah, the bipartisan.
Okay. We would probably have to think on that further. We'd be happy to reach out. I would just have to kind of get a little smarter on their bill.
Okay, and this is
But
something
I
that we'll
appreciate
do.
you mentioning it.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we're working with the American Counseling Association, because we're seeing in terms of diversity and inclusion and all that stuff is the disparate stuff. And also I work with the National Career Development Association. So again, we're trying to get some of the equity language in there, particularly as it relates to career choices and exploration.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for raising that. It's something we'll look at. We can look at further.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Donna Lent had her hand raised.
Bill, I'm wondering if we were to do a memo in support of this budget, of this bill, would you be able to help us distribute it to the legislative offices instead of doing it through email? So there's actually a piece of paper. If we could provide that.
That would be. Is that a question for me as far as?
Yes. I'm sorry. I could.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Ben.
No, I'm sorry that the video didn't work. We would certainly appreciate that, or even a letter of support, which sometimes can be laid out like a memo where it kind of just touches on some of the key points. Again, we've been lucky to work with AUW in the past, and they've always provided a letter that we've been able to share with other offices. I think especially when they can see a letter like that, or whether it's a letter or a memo, or hear from some of your groups, that has really been completely helpful in building support for the bill. So I think a letter, we would certainly welcome that. We understand that you're also very busy, so we don't want to make too much work for you. But to the extent that a letter would be possible, it's something that I think would be helpful.
Well, this is something that, if distributed, this is something we would sign on to. But I'm just wondering if an individual memo of support from us might serve better.
I think that could still be helpful. Yeah, and no, I think it could, especially reaching out to offices, just maybe get them a little more familiar. Since it's been a couple of years since we reintroduced. But I think I could see that being helpful. So thank you for the offer.
And we can also pass around the current Gender Equity Education Act, so you can all look at it and see other suggestions for improving it as you want to be suggested for the next version, right, Ben?
I think that would be good, fine too. I'm also happy to give my email address if people have questions. Again, the only caveat I would add is we've had this bill for a few Congresses now. We haven't made too many changes, but if we're always open to ideas, whether it's in this bill or in another bill, or other ways to address some of these issues. So I can sign back into the chat room after this and leave my contact information. Otherwise, so if you want to circulate that, happy to chat with anyone.
We have that. And thank you very much, Ben. I guess you have to go soon. Is there any last urgent question that we need to ask Ben? If not, let's go on to Donna Lent and hear about her organizing the appointments process for the transition team. Donna?
Yes, thank you so much, Sue. Am I able to share my screen by any chance, if that's possible?
Yes. Sherry?
Okay.
And try.
Last time. As it's done for most election cycles since 1976, has reconvened our Women's Appointment Project. I see that there are some people on the call that are actually have joined as partners for this initiative. And we are going to be publicly releasing the website for this coalition within a day or two. We are circulating it among our partners first for their first look, and we'll be moving it to a public launch soon after. So the Coalition for Women's Appointment is going to be a place where women can get themselves appointment ready by working with a step-by-step informational guide where they can review all of the requirements, gather necessary documentation, and then receive the best tips and best practices on how to prepare a federally government appointment application. They will have access to some other learning tools that have been prepared by other organizations. The Partnership for Public Service has done some really good programs, and we're going to provide links to those. But the goal of this is to create really a talent bank of highly qualified women that will be reviewed based on subject area matter. We're setting up task forces that will be for the different departments within the federal government, and will be vetted and reviewed, and to make recommendations to the transition team, but also to be a resource for them, to help let them make the decision on whether or not this is something that they want to go through. There are a lot of things that come into an appointment nomination process. A lot of personal information must be shared, FBI background investigation, your financial history, and we want to be sure that women are aware of it all when they begin the process. Now, we're really happy to see that the Biden-Harris transition team has committed to making half of their appointments be women. That was one of our goals in this, so we commend the team for doing that. It is a multi-partisan initiative, as it is a 501c3 project, and the goal is really to support the incoming Biden-Harris administration in their efforts to really have gender parity for women as political appointees with a clear focus on diversity and inclusion of historically underrepresented groups, including women of color, LGBTQ+, and women with disabilities. We are having other organizations come to the coalition as partners. Everybody is sharing in the cost of the project. We have not hired consultants or have any paid staff at this point. We are trying to do this with an eye towards keeping costs down for everyone, and the partners sharing in whatever the costs are to take care of the program. And the goal is really to establish a digital registry of women qualified for senior level government positions, and beyond the transition process, also to provide a resource for states across all across the country to be able to pull as a resource for women for their own state boards and commissions. And even a further goal would be to create a corporate resource. We don't want to lose the data once we have it. In past years, this was all done on paper, and we have, for the 21st century, created a digital process, which I'm it's going to make the work a whole lot easier. We are also asking partners to provide recommendations for some of the people that will be serving on our task force. And the task force really do mimic the task force that was set up by the Biden-Harris transition operation. So we are looking for women that really are experts in the fields that will be able to review the resumes of those women submitting to be for consideration. We have really important, we feel that we want to raise the bar for the level of and quality of women that are being selected, you know, the prospective candidates for appointment. And, you know, we have some criteria that we really want them to adhere to, and that would be support for women's advancement as leaders in every sector representing the diversity of the American population, support for the Equal Rights Amendment and pay equity, support for the advancement of women in all professions, support for women and girls' educational opportunities, support for women's access to healthcare, including reproductive health care, and support for women's right to choose, support for diversity and inclusion of underrepresented populations, which I had already mentioned, and then a commitment to the elimination of sexual harassment and violence against women with support for social justice, civil rights, and human rights. So it's a very big undertaking, but it is one that the caucus has put together before. And we are excited to really kick it off. We did hold back a little bit because we wanted to be respectful of the Biden-Harris transition team. We wanted them to kick off. And, you know, as usual with these things, a lot is happening behind the scenes even before, you know, things are made public. We're certain, you know, that President-elect Biden has a good sense of what he wants his cabinet to look like. I will tell you that in the past, the reason why we had Janet Reno as Attorney General under the Clinton administration was because that was an appointment that the caucus was very active in pushing. And they kept, you know, there were a few other people that were in line, and it just kept getting pushed back at them. We had a very strong Florida caucus, and were very much, you know, involved with Janet Reno, and that appointment came through. In addition, in 1976, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's first appointment to the federal bench was done by during the Carter administration as a result of our recommendation. So we will continue that tradition of recommending judgeships. You know, there's a lot of work to do right now because of what has happened over the last 4 years, and you know, we are bringing in and collaborating with other groups to see that we have some really high quality women that will be appointed to the bench as well. I think that what we can do is I will provide, I did provide a little bit earlier, a new version of really a PowerPoint that that I wasn't able to share, that perhaps Sue would be able to send out to everybody. Again, we are still accepting, we have room for a few more partners. And even if there is support that you know, that you'd like to jump on board with, we would be happy to have, of course, your interest in this project move forward. And also, if there are suggestions, there are a few more spots left on the task force. So if anybody has a suggestion of someone that they would like to forward to me, I'll put my email address in the chat as well. And if you have any questions, I guess I can take some questions.
I don't know who's calling on questioners. Donna, first.
Go ahead, Karen.
Okay, thanks. I'm really excited that National Women's Political Caucus, of which there are several of us represented today on this call, is really active with this and focusing some policy issues. The connection between policy and the people in office is so important. The task force you're talking about, is it a group of task forces that will review applications? And so are you looking for specific areas of people? I don't know whether there's been something sent out saying, please send us names for the task force, but
Right.
I'm sure we could come up with some.
Yeah, I'm sure that you can as well. And I want to thank our California chapter has also signed on as a you know, collaborating partner, I guess.
Yeah.
Project as well. And we are getting ready. Actually, Carrie Ann, our president of our California caucus, received yesterday.
Okay.
The information.
Okay. I'll check with her.
And yes, the task force are really, they mirror just about what the Biden transition team's task forces look like. So we have, you know, education, judiciary, health, all of it. And,
Okay.
some of them are combined. So that's
Mhm.
why it's important that, you know, we have multiple people. And, you know, it's, this has really been an effort that I hadn't been involved in before, even though I've been a member of the caucus for 27 years. But I always knew that it was going on. And I'm just happy that we're able to move this into the 21st century and really go digital with it. And I think it's really important because not everybody wants to move to Washington. So the idea that we will maintain this data bank, this talent data bank, to provide as a resource for state boards and commissions across the country, I think is really going to do a lot for us, because, you know, we do want to have women with good feminist values involved in policy making decisions at every level. And there are a number of regional federal positions too. So yes, this is a really good place to identify regional directors and people like that. So it's great work. Appreciate the leadership up there in Washington. Thank you.
Anna, can you tell us what the URL for the website will be when it's released?
Yes, it'll be appointwomen.org, which is also historical. And there will be a section that does relate to the history of the women's appointment initiative through the years. We're working on that as well. I think that's, you know, we're all working so hard to make something happen today, but we really don't want to forget about the history of this project and how meaningful it's been for some of the appointments that have come out of it, including, by the way, I didn't mention Madeleine Albright was a recommendation of this coalition. So there have been, you know, hundreds of women that have been placed in key positions, and we just want to see that again. We just want to see really good policy-driven feminist women at the table, leading some of these agencies, or even second-tier positions, which most of them will be. But we're really happy to be able to pull this coalition again this year. And we just, you know, we would like everyone to come in as a partner.
Thanks so much. Maybe at the end of the meeting, we can entertain more questions. Diana Zuckerman, can you fill us in on women's health priorities now?
Sure, thanks so much. I'm Dr. Diana Zuckerman. I'm president of the National Center for Health Research, which is a nonprofit think tank in Washington, D.C., and we focus on a wide range of health issues, and it's not just women's health issues, but obviously women's health is a huge part of what we do, and I'll be focusing on that today. Just briefly, my training is in epidemiology and public health, as well as psychology, and those have all been very handy during this very stressful year. So I'm going to first start out by talking about COVID-19 and its impact on women, and how we expect that to change in the coming months. Even though men are more likely to die of COVID-19 than women, but the disproportionate impact on women's lives is, I think, very obvious. First of all, women live longer than men, and so there are a lot of women who've been very isolated as older women who are at risk, whether they're in assisted living facilities or living at home or in nursing homes. So many women that have not been able to see loved ones and family members and have felt very isolated, and how difficult that's been. So a big part of what we've been doing on this issue is criticizing the administration's political view of COVID-19 and the fact that they have lowered the standards for COVID testing, lowered the standards for a vaccine, and lowered standards for treatments. They've allowed products on the market and encouraged products to be used that have never been tested and never been approved by the FDA for those purposes. So that's been a big issue, and we expect that's going to change dramatically. But we are somewhat concerned about the vaccines, because obviously people are hoping that our lives can go back to normal when we get a vaccine that's effective, and we're hearing it's 90% effective, which would be great if that's true. But you have to understand that these vaccines have been given to about 20,000 people each, companies, and about 20,000 are on placebo. And of all those, 30 or 40,000 people in each study, only about 100 of them have gotten sick. And so although most of them have been in the placebo group, some of them have been in the vaccine group. And we still don't know how good this vaccine, how good these vaccines will be for older people and people at greater risk, because those are not the largest group of people in these studies. And on the larger issue, the last few years have seen lowering of standards for many different medical products. And again, we expect and hope that that will change, and we'll be working to make that change. There's just been so much emphasis on what I might call speed and greed, getting products on the market more quickly so that companies can make more money. And one of the things that's happened is a lack of diversity in those clinical trials. So you end up with, you do end up with women in the trials, but not usually anybody older, and not older women. And so a lot of the people who take prescription drugs are older, including older women, and yet they're not being tested on older people. And as we get older, we metabolize drugs differently. The risks of side effects can be more serious for older people. And so it's very important that that all medical products, whether it's COVID or cancer or heart disease or whatever it is, that they be tested on women, people of color, and older people. And that has still not been done as much as it should be. I'm going to just say a few words about reproductive health, because I assume that everybody on this call knows those issues very well. Our center doesn't focus exclusively on reproductive health. We feel like there's a lot of other organizations that do that, but I will say that one of our concerns has been some of the evidence that some of the products given to women that have been approved by the FDA were not properly tested first. And in the last few years, I guess Essure, a sterilization device, has gotten in the news a lot because this is something that was being used particularly for women on Medicaid who didn't want to have more children. And it ends up that there's evidence that it's not as effective at preventing pregnancy as the company had said it would be. And also a lot of women have complained about having to get hysterectomies and other surgery as a result of complications from Essure. Another a reproductive product that we've looked at are birth control pills made with a hormone called drospirenone. Yaz and Yasmin were the most well-known of those. We, of course, support lots of choices for reproductive health, but given that there are about 100 different contraceptives on the market in the United States, we think it would be great if the ones that are more likely to cause fatal blood clots were taken off the market, and that would include the ones made with this particular hormone. We think that women could have be very happy with 90 choices for contraceptives instead of 100. And so that's something that we're working on and will continue to work on. One thing I wanted to mention that many of you may be less familiar with is the Consumer Product Safety Commission. The Consumer Product Safety Commission is a small agency of the federal government. It is located in Bethesda, and most people don't know about it because it's got a relatively small budget, a relatively small staff, and it's more political in a different kind of way because the commissioners make the decision. Instead of having one commissioner like the FDA has, the Consumer Product Safety Commission has several commissioners, and they have, for example, they have 3 of the party in political office in the White House. So during the Trump administration, there have been 3 commissioners that are Republicans and 2 that are Democrats generally, and that will switch with the Biden administration, automatically switch. However, the reason why I bring this up today, so the Consumer Product Safety Commission focuses on consumer products. That includes a lot of things that aren't, that you take for granted, things in your home, things in your, outside in your community. That can include things like artificial turf. It can include playgrounds. It can include the material used for your couch or your chair. It can include some toxic things that might be in your computer. So there's a lot of reasons to be very interested in the Consumer Product Safety Commission, and I wanted to make sure that everybody on this call knew that that the White House had nominated a woman named Nancy Beck to be the chair of the commission. He nominated her several months ago. The nomination did not proceed because there were several moderate Republicans who opposed it, in addition to all of the Democrats, because Nancy Beck has a reputation of always aligning with industry against consumers. So not really the kind of person you'd want as chair of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, particularly when there's any issue of toxic chemicals. She always sides with the companies and not with the public health experts. So I wanted you to know that there's concern that she might still be confirmed before the end of the year. And if she is, she will have a 7-year appointment. So we will be stuck with her. So I wanted to say that if any of you, particularly from other organizations, think that this is an issue that you might be interested in a very small way, not a time-consuming way, getting involved in opposing her nomination, please let me know. That would be great. And a couple of other things I just want to mention. I did want to mention that today the NIH announced that they are going to be funding a study of racial disparities in pregnancy-related complications and deaths. Many of you probably have heard there's been a lot of concern lately that some very affluent, well-educated, in some cases physicians, but Black women have died in childbirth and of complications that white women don't usually die from. And so the question is, what's going on here? And, you know, it's one thing if you think it's because women of color tend to have lower incomes or less access to healthcare, but what these examples have shown is that even very affluent and educated Black women have died in childbirth, and you know, healthy young women. So it seemed, so one of the questions is, you know, is this discrimination on the part of the healthcare system? What's going on here? And so I'm glad to report that NIH has announced that they will be funding research on this, and we'll be keeping track of that to make sure that research is done in an appropriate way. And then the last thing I just want to mention is that every health agency in our federal government has had an Office for Women's Health. So there's an Office for Women's Health at NIH, there's an Office for Women's Health at HHS, there's an Office for Women's Health at FDA, at the CDC, and so on. But the clout of those offices has waned greatly during this current administration, and really they have no clout and they have no independence. And so they used to be able to fund research and focus on issues that would be helpful to improving women's health, and that's become less and less possible. So that'll be one of the things that we will again be working on in the next administration, to rebuild and strengthen the clout and the independence of those offices for women's health in the many federal health agencies. So that's the rundown I wanted to give for everyone, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about any of the issues that I raised.
Thank you so much, Diana. Questions? I don't see any hands up, so why don't we go on? We're always short on time. Connie, do you want to report on the IWPR report?
I would love to. It's going to be a short report because I cannot be the brilliant women who are the economists and the researchers at the Institute for Women's Policy Research. And that's, don't laugh, Harriet, I heard that. However, this is a really new report. Last week they had a symposium on it that I attended, and I had hoped to get C. Nicole Mason, the new president of the IWPRN, but of course that was very short notice, and it was Veterans Day was the next day, and it was a mess. But anyway, so basically this report is called Building, and ING is in parens, the Future, bold policies for gender equitable recovery. And I think now that we've all been faced with the problems that have come across with COVID to the economy and to our health system and to everything else, it's time for us to focus on what can be done. So this report actually provides a framework for shared prosperity and equitable economic recovery. It examines the impact of the economic crisis and recession on working women, their families, and communities. Does anybody know how many women between September and October left the workforce? It's over 850,000 women. And why do you think they left the workforce at that time? They weren't just getting tired of looking for work or not having good pay or anything. They were there because they had to be home with their children, who were of school age, of daycare age. So we need to focus, almost 1 million women. If I'd been one of them, I think I'd be a little PO'd. So this report also provides a blueprint for a gender equitable recovery that's not only about meeting the immediate economic needs of women and families, but it also has a long-term strategy for creating stronger systems and institutions that reflect the experience and contributions of women in the workforce, in society, and in their families. A gender equitable recovery will also require a significant public investment at both the state and federal levels. And this is where we hear people saying, oh no, spend money. Well, yes, spend money, but spend money on your citizenry, especially on over half your citizenry who takes care of more than half of the population. So it includes developing a robust and well-resourced national child care infrastructure. Can you imagine what it would be like if we actually had a robust child care structure where your children could be cared for, where you could be sure of the quality of the care that they're getting, and in fact that it would continue on until the time that they don't need it any longer. I just think that would have been a miracle in my age as a single mom who started out raising a 2- and a 4-year-old. So yeah, it also includes rebuilding the social safety net. Remember that thing we used to have when we all believed that citizenship was an important thing and civics meant a community? So that needs to be rebuilt. Raising labor and job quality standards and addressing historically discriminatory, racialized, and genderized economic policies and practices that have harmed women and families. So this report plays that out too. It also says that a gender equitable recovery includes policies that protect women's health, bodily autonomy. Remember autonomy? We fought for that in the 70s and the 80s. We thought we had it, and then it slipped away again. And freedom by ensuring that they are healthy and have access to affordable and quality health care, paid sick parental and family leave, and are empowered to make their own reproductive health choices that are in the best interest of their families and careers. A woman cannot plan her career, her life policy, her work, if she does not know when she's going to become pregnant and cannot control that fact. So, talking about rebuilding the safety net in this report, they want to expand the access to programs for workers and the most affected individuals and family. And assistance and income support should be widely available to the individuals and families in need of short-term assistance due to unemployment, illness, or other life circumstances, and to other people with more significant barriers to economic security. Income support should be based on a minimum floor established at the federal level using a formula based on state-based self-sufficiency standards and updated economic well-being measures. These measures should keep pace with inflation and rising median incomes. Programs should also raise or eliminate asset limit caps, and especially during these times of economic crisis. You cannot be looking at caps. That's like punishing people twice over the economic situation. Increase investments for education and training for women workers. Provide direct support to states that allow women in the most affected sectors to pursue education and training opportunities to enter jobs with family supporting wages in high demand or emerging sectors. We need to keep women up with what's happening. We need the STEM. Eliminate or suspend time limits and work requirements for families that to help the lower income families recover. States should eliminate or suspend time limits and work requirements for families who receive TANF, that's temporary aid to needy families. Make the child tax credit fully refundable. Expand the earned income tax credit. Expand eligibility of unemployment insurance, like people who are considered contractors by some, and provide emergency economic unemployment assistance. Now, we talked about private sector investments and assistance to states. We need to provide emergency economic assistance to states. What happened when our government was derelict in its duty to its citizens was that the burden has fallen on our states. Our states have expended all of the discretionary funds, shall we call them. They're not really discretionary and they're not really surplus, but they're there for a reason. They've expended those and now they're in a tough spot and we need to make sure they get help. We also, on raising job quality and labor standards, we need to start increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour as a base floor. And let's not forget those tipped workers who struggle on $2.38, is it an hour plus tips? And how do they actually get credit for their tips from the employer? That's a good question. We need to provide sick pay paid sick leave and family medical leave. We need to be able to ensure people that they will have a job to come back to, that we can pay them for a certain amount of time. It's usually, I think, what is it, 6 weeks? No, 12 weeks, I think, of pay. And that goes on in Europe all the time, and those countries are able to afford it. So we need to create an employer. Sorry, that's my clock. It does that all the time. We need to create employer-sponsored care subsidy programs so that we have care at the beginning of life and we have care in the older years of life. How many people have had to be the sandwich generation between one and the other? And we need to be able to have a care subsidy that we can offer for that. Finally, we also need to protect and expand reproductive health care access. And it's going to be interesting to see how our Supreme Court functions on that. We may, I hope, have a good surprise that it's not going to be all bad, but I don't know about that. We need to accelerate closing of the pay gap. As the person who was the Secretary Treasurer for the National Committee on Pay Equity for umpty-zillion years, I can tell you that the economic moment now calls for a bold reimagining of not only our economy, but our health and care systems as well. So in this report, you're going to explore all kinds of political, social, and economic investments that are necessary to step into a future that's actually shaped by the workers, by the women, and by the families who are the backbone of the U.S. economy and its success. And that's what I have to say. So this report can be found on the IWPR website. I'm going to send the link into our chat room. And I know I have at least one person on from IWPR, but I don't know if she's going to want to comment on it. I'm just so sorry we couldn't get C. Nicole to come on. So are there any questions?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add to that. My name's Erin Weber. I'm the manager of the office.
Oh, Erin, you're here. Great.
Yeah, with IWPR. Connie, nice to see you over Zoom and not just over email. A few things I just wanted to add. Thank you so much for that great overview. A couple of just interesting things we realized when coming up with the report. We're definitely highlighting care in our work to make a more gender equitable economy. And the interesting thing is that this has been done before. We've seen the US have a robust, affordable, subsidized childcare program in the past. So we've been, instead of looking forward like we often do, we've been looking backward a bit to get some lessons learned. Another huge focus of us for this report was looking at the issues from an intersectional lens. So the recession has been particularly hard on Black women and Latino women. And so we've been particularly looking at where are the gaps there. So actually the Biden-Harris plan does touch on that, but we also know that a lot of the supports that were offered initially to combat the economic effects of COVID didn't necessarily reach those women. And you can read the specific figures in the report, but especially things like the Small Business Association loans, those did not reach the types of business owners that were hardest hit. Our president and CEO also has termed this the she session because this is the first recession where the economic impacts have been felt more by women than by men. So the purpose of this report was really to, first of all, address the fact that this is affecting women more, and also, like I said, through the intersectional lens, but then also thinking about what were the entrenched issues that we could address through these more forward-thinking plans. And the Biden administration's Build Back Better plan touches on a few of our recommendations, but we also think a few of them could go a bit further.
Are there any other questions? Did a good job of echoing Nicole's words. That's wonderful to know. Anyway, this report is really worth it. Are there questions? I'm sorry, did I miss one?
Some of us put them in the chat.
Oh, okay. All right, let's see. Get rid of right to work, amen. Oh, I see, there's maternal, okay. Do you all remember the group that was to be the collaborating organization of all women's group? Yes, it was the National Council of Women's Organizations, wasn't it?
Right.
It folded, but it had a meeting like this one every month. I also worry that in this reduced economy, women concerns might be compelling against each other. How do we work?
Competing against each other.
Against each other, sorry. How do we work to avoid that? I think, well, what do you guys think? I'm a very conciliatory kind of person. I believe in trying to spread the tent very wide. But, you know, I think we each have our areas of expertise within our organizations, perhaps. But we recognize that we need each other. And I think women are much better at recognizing they need each other, especially in a time of stress like we have right now. But do you have a suggestion, Holly?
Well, I see that Martha Burke said that she was the chair for several years.
Yes.
Was it good for us to have let that fold?
I don't think we let it fold, Holly.
Yes, we did. We did.
Things that happened.
This is Martha Burke. I'm just trying to unmute my microphone. It was not a good thing that it folded. I was gone 3 or 4 years at least when it did fold, but it was internal strife. I think there was some questionable financial issues in there. I'm not sure. It was very effective when we had it because we had better access on the Hill, for example, than all of us trying to go individually. We had task forces for various issues, and we would go. I've often told this story because of Biden's nomination, and people are still holding the Anita Hill hearings against him. But, you know, we all went to see, but about 5 of us went to see him during the Hill hearings. We were in the audience. We tried to get him to let the other 2 women testify that were waiting in the wings. He wouldn't do it. Fast forward, though, later, he would meet with us, a group, on the Violence Against Women Act, and we helped hash out some of the provisions of that. And some of you may have been with us on that, but that was the kind of thing we did. I think it very much needs to be revitalized. I don't know how hard it would be to do. I am out west in New Mexico, so I'm not in the picture except possibly in an advisory role. But those of you who are in Washington and do represent groups, I think you ought to consider it. And if so, I'd be happy to talk to anybody about what would be needed.
With Zoom, you're not off the hook, wherever you are.
That's true. That is true.
Connie, this is Karen from California again. Sorry, I do think have learned a lot about being more collaborative, particularly in recent years, and we've also learned that that's a way to bring a lot of younger women into the mix and more diverse women into the mix. And so I think, but there's an infrastructure cost. I mean, the ability to manage a database, the ability to have the meetings, which I think is much easier with Zoom now, to decide who does what and address conflicts if they arise. I don't think it would be terribly expensive, but I certainly think that there would be some cost involved, and so it's not added. It is added work, so I wouldn't suggest that it be adopted by us. This clearinghouse is a really good start, but the clearinghouse is really, as I understand it, more information.
That's right.
So I'm sure that we would be interested out here in California in figuring out a way that something came back and how we could involve a lot of organizations. But somebody has to have a really good data management system. And
we probably, given the technology that would be involved now, would need a paid staffer to do that.
Possibly.
When the council was at its most active, we didn't have any paid staff. I worked pro bono, and my staff staffed it, as did that. You know, we got help from some of the other organizations. NEA, the National Education Association, donated space for the meeting.
Right.
And so it was a very shoestring operation financially, but we did get a lot accomplished given that we didn't have a huge budget.
I'd just like to mention that the clearinghouse does try to take over some of the functions. An example is this meeting where we tried to involve numerous organizations and topics, and the purpose is to inform each other. We'd also be glad to do more with sharing information on meetings and activities and reports, which we try to do in our monthly newsletters. So we can do it at least to some extent, but again, the Clearinghouse on Women's Issues is an all-volunteer organization itself.
I thought one of the most helpful things with the National Council of Women's Organizations was the booklet that was published with all the different organizations, so you could sort of build a network, or you could network. And then that could be done online. But I just want to say one other thing. I want to thank Sue and Connie for what they've been doing with the clearinghouse and providing more information.
I second that, and pardon me for interrupting, I didn't mean to. In terms of the publication and other things, we did raise money for the council, and we got some decent funding from several sources, a few foundations. The drug companies worked collaboratively with us and gave us grants. So we had some money, and we would spend it on that sort of thing. All I was trying to say is we did not spend it on salaries because we staffed it sort of out of our hide, so to speak. Fortunately, I was able to work without compensation, and we did pay the staff, but in turn, the NCWO staff staffed all of the task forces in terms of communication and that sort of thing. But it was really pre-internet, pre-Facebook, and so forth. So it would require a heavier duty technical support staff, I think, now. But there is no reason it could not be reconstituted policy-wise, and I don't see why money could not be generated once more for it. It was an appealing concept to many of the funders, possibly because they viewed it as less controversial than some of the other groups, although in my view, we were as radical as any of our members. So that's all I have to say. But if anybody wants to know more about it or talk about how to get it reconstituted, I'll be happy to.
I'll put your email in the chat box, Martha, if that's okay.
Can somebody give background about so many women's organizations have folded in the last decade? That I guess would be Denise. If there's more information you could share. Excuse me, Jan, for reading.
That's okay. I'm sure there's been a whole lot. I just wanted to add there's over more than $100,000 in the bank account for the National Coalition of Council of Women's Organizations, and Ellie and an attorney have been discussing what to do with that money. And as Sue indicated, some folks were hoping that the CWI could carry on in some capacities the work of the council. The website for the council was hacked badly and never reconstructed, so that is gone. The membership booklet that was produced each year really would need to be updated. There were well over 200 women's organizations listed there, so it would take a lot of work. And in agreement with Martha, it really needs to have an ongoing budget and staff in order to be really effective. And I think also a coordinator or a chair who is really just devoted exclusively to the council. In the past, we've had people who had other responsibilities and they sort of divided their time. But I would advocate for a chair who could be solely responsible for the management and then the vision of the council. I think that would be something that would need to be updated. So anyway, that's all I have to say.
I'll be glad to look into that and see what we can do. But right now, I think we need to get on, because of the timing here, we need to get on to Megan Corrado and her report. And Martha, maybe you and I can talk offline about it.
That would be good. And Jan, too,
we'll get
do a Zoom about what you were talking about. So we do need to talk offline. Thank you.
I'll give you a call. Okay.
Right.
And in the meantime, I'd just like to mention that organizations are welcome to be members of CWI, and that's one way to have you listed, and we can always expand that listing as we get more members. So we have very minimal dues for organizational members, $100 for 3 years, and welcome your participation in that in the interim. So that's at least a partial solution. Megan, are you ready to fill us in on international global women's issues?
Sure thing, thank you. So, and apologies if there's a little background noise. I've got leaf blowers to my right and my husband's on a conference call and speaker in the next room. So lots going on in our household today. But thank you very much. My name is Megan Corrado. I'm the VP of Global Affairs with CWI. I also serve as the co-chair to the U.S. Civil Society Working Group on Women, Peace, and Security. And just by way of background, the group is a collective of over 50 NGOs working to implement the WPS Act of 2017 and to ensure women's meaningful participation in all facets of peace building. In conjunction with our Secretariat, the United States Institute of Peace, we seek to build bridges between the US government and civil society and serve as a go-to network of experts to facilitate a cross-government and holistic approach to WPS through foreign and national security policy. I think we lost Karen Mulhauser, but she was actually our original chair back in 2010 when the group stood up. So big shoes to fill. So what I've also been working on is I'm a liaison to the Coalition of Gender Coalitions, which is a group of the 9 largest coalitions working on international gender, women and girls issues. So that's Girls Not Brides, Coalition to End Gender-Based Violence globally, Coalition for Women's Economic Empowerment, the Sexual and Reproductive Rights and Health Roundtable, Big Ideas Coalition, etc. So over the last few months, we've been working together both collectively and within our individual coalitions to put together a framework for the new administration on ways to elevate issues related to gender in its development, humanitarian, asylum, security, and overall foreign policy. So from the outset, we sat down with folks that were previously serving on transition teams, particularly the Obama folks, as well as civil society groups that had worked on transition memos in the past to get some advice and some guidance on how to be most effective. So we were advised to really be brief in our recommendations and provide the top line priorities that the new administration could achieve within the first 100 days. And those would be, sort of key wins that they could claim from the outset. So overall, I mean, every coalition has sort of specific, issue-specific and context-specific recommendations, but there were definitely some cross-cutting themes that emerged throughout the community. And one of the things, the key thing, is to create a feminist foreign policy. And so what is that? It would ensure that the United States interaction on the global stage would prioritize peace, gender equality, and environmental integrity. It would enshrine, promote, and protect the human rights of all. It would seek to disrupt colonial, racist, and patriarchal and male-dominated power structures and allocate significant resources, including research and money, to achieve that vision. Feminist foreign policy is coherent in its approach across all levels of government, and it's anchored by the exercise of the values at home. So the things that we were talking about in all these presentations. So demonstrating, feminist principles in our domestic policy, as well as in our foreign policy. And it also prioritizes multilateralism and intersectionality with a clear understanding that women are not a monolithic group and have many intersecting identities that inform their impact and their experiences. So after this, I will drop in the chat the feminist foreign policy framework that was created with about 50 other intersectional feminist groups over the last about 2 years or so. Another priority that we identified was really rolling back the harmful policies that the Trump administration put forward. One of the biggest challenges, I think, was the way in which they defined gender. It was redefined as just between men and women. Obviously, that's not helpful. It needs to be intersectional. International programming needs to include funding and support for persons of all identities, sexual orientation, abilities, economic status, indigeneity, class, race, ethnicity, religion, etc. So this really, monolithic view of men and women and families has been phenomenally harmful to our foreign policy over the last few years. Another thing would be to reinstitute gender-based violence as a grounds for asylum. That was courtesy of the Sessions tenure and has caused untold harm, particularly as there's been increasing climate refugees and those from conflict and fragile states. And a big one, which relates to a lot of domestic issues we talked about, is repealing the Global Gag Rule. And that's what bars funding for any organization that provides services for or information about abortion. So that's a really big thing that we'll be moving collectively to address. Our third priority is really funding and resources, which we all need. And there is some it is problematic because we all are kind of fighting for the same pot, and the pot is way too small. There are numerous policies and strategies, even that the Trump administration put forward, but there's no government or little government funding, staff, or expertise. We also want to make sure that U.S. government funding is going into international context, and that obviously they need to be focused on gender, but they also need to be focused on domestic and local organizations that are both women-led and provide assistance to women and girls. The third issue in priority is really coordinating gender issues. Too often, gender issues become siloed. So you have the women, peace, and security agenda over here. You have gender-based violence here. You have sexual and reproductive rights and health here. But really, they all interact in some fashion. What the community came up with is creating some type of executive level entity to coordinate and oversee the feminist foreign policy and integration and synthesization of the various strategies, plans, and policies. There is a GBV policy strategy, there is a WPS strategy, but how do we make these all communicate with each other so that the implementing agencies are thinking about all of these issues when putting together programming? So really want to create a cross-government approach to achieving gender equality. Another priority is oversight. It's really hard to fight for funding and tell them how much you need when we have no idea where the funds are going. We really want to see more public reporting and regular consultations with civil society. Too often the government will double count things, that shouldn't really just belong to the WPS community. They're like, well, we worked on some GBV issues in Afghanistan, so that counts. So we need to sort of break that out and have a better understanding of where the dollars are going to make sure all of these key issues are being fully funded. Another item, and I noted somebody put this in the chat, was to create programs that have a gender analysis. All international facing programs and policies should be designed through a gender lens and require gender analysis in the design, monitoring, and evaluation component. And lastly, really want to establish US leadership to address the issues that are accompanying and exacerbating COVID-19 for women on the international stage. We're seeing a shadow pandemic of gender-based violence running rampant throughout the world as women and girls are home during these days. Women and girls are bearing the brunt of the pandemic in terms of lost economic opportunity, marginalization from peace processes, inability to access healthcare, particularly reproductive services, and again, facing exorbitant rates of sexual and gender-based violence. So with that said, I think we have the Trump administration has a very unique legacy in terms of women's issues. They did put forward several strategies and policies related to women that were a step forward. You had the Women, Peace, and Security Strategy announced last year. You had the Women's Economic Empowerment Initiative put forward. However, while a step in the general right direction, they require significant implementation, revision before their implementation. So for instance, as chair of the Women, Peace, and Security group, we want them to review and update the strategy and implementation plans immediately and come up with a more detailed and comprehensive framework to advance the agenda. Prioritize WPS and the national security strategy and other relevant strategies and policies to break down the siloed approach. Provide robust funding, prioritize attainment of gender parity and leadership throughout the US government, and particularly within the implementing agencies of foreign policy, and to commit to regular consultation with civil society. In terms of our approach in moving forward this advocacy, so as I mentioned, many of the various coalitions I identified earlier put together their own transition memos in the weeks and months past that were first socialized to the campaigns. Because there's 501c3 restrictions, they were sent to all of the campaigns. Now that we have President-elect Biden's transition team in place, we're working to disseminate our materials to the relevant teams, so state, USAID, DOD, DHS, consulting with them one-on-one and trying to get our priorities and materials articulated. We're also bringing in members to meet with our larger coalitions as well to make sure they have all the information necessary they need. And then moving forward, we're going to start compiling materials for longer term goals and priorities, so beyond the first 100 days, as well as on context-specific issues. So for instance, ensuring that Afghan women are involved in the ongoing peace process moving forward. Our other sort of approach is to be socializing our work with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee staff to make sure that Congress is in a position to hold the administration accountable and to amplify our priorities. We're planning meetings and briefings with relevant caucuses and members once the new Congress is seated, and trying to grow our coalitions. As I mentioned, breaking down the silos between our different issues is imperative. So want to socialize that, incorporate men, build allyship with organizations and coalitions that work on adjacent issues in order to amplify our collective voices. So I see we're running low on time, so I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.
Megan, could you share your email address with the group?
Sure thing, happy to do so.
Thanks.
This is Karen. I put it in the chat, but is CEDAW, the Convention on Ending Discrimination Against Women, is that still on the agenda for US ratification, and how important is it?
I'd say yes. I think that's something we've also discussed in making sure that the US becomes a party to all relevant gender treaties and protocols. I think, again, that depends a lot on what happens with the Senate in Georgia. So yeah, we're kind of waiting and seeing what happens, and then kind of really need to mobilize on that front as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions, or I'll throw it back to Sue and Connie.
We have so much to do. It's just, it's kind of forced you when you think about what we've lost here that we have to regain, and then what has never been had has to be put in place internationally. We can never die, folks. We just have to keep working. So I'm going to turn this over to Sue now to kind of close us out. I think am I right, Sue?
I want to thank you all for attending. This was an exciting meeting. We have a lot to work on together, and we'll be trying to put it together for our newsletter. The next newsletter will be coming out in January. We'll be planning to have a meeting in January, the third or fourth Tuesday in January. We'll let you know what that's all about. If you all have ideas, please let us know. In the meantime, please join CWI as an individual, or better yet, as an organization. And it's a great way to share information we'll try and develop better distribution systems. One of the things I always used to love about the NCWO is it would announce meetings of interest on a regular basis, and we can be doing that more, but we particularly need to do that to our members, so there are advantages for joining. And we have a good team of volunteers, and look forward to your ideas, and we'll be summarizing them in the January newsletter. So thank you all. Anybody else have any final words? Thank you for coming, and thank you very much for our presenters, if they're still with us. We really appreciate getting an idea on priorities. If you also have sign-on letters and things like that, CWI is active in signing on and sharing letters to get more support. So thank you. Anything else?